it's Mrs. Deacon. So we've already completed step 1 of our pre-writing. Now that we've planned our story, we're going to be moving on to step 2. So you're going to be moving your page down. Unless you did it on a piece of loose leaf or a piece of paper at home, then I want you to take that paper out and have it in front of you. Step 2 of the writing process is drafting. Drafting is kind of when we're physically writing this story. So our learning targets when we're drafting are, I can write a story using my pre-writing tool as a guide, meaning I can write a story using my organizer or my planner as a guide for my story. I can write a story with a beginning, middle, and end. And I can read my story as I write to make sure it's organized and make sense. So just like when we're reading and we're pausing and using all those great comprehension strategies to make sense and to understand our book better, we're going to be pausing and rereading our story as we're writing it just to make sure it makes sense. And this will just help us during the next couple of steps. So before we start, I just want to say again, if you are doing your online learning using a phone or a tablet or an iPad, and if you don't have a physical keyboard like a laptop or a computer, I'm really recommending that you do this next step with paper and a pencil or paper and pen at home without the technology, because it will be a lot easier to physically write than it will be to actually type up this story if you're using a phone or tablet. So my story, if we remember, was about Tucker and Brooks, and they were in the backyard during the spring and the weekend, and Brooks stole Tucker's bone. Tucker tried to get it from him, but he couldn't. So Tucker gave Brooks one of his other toys. Brooks dropped Tucker's bone. Tucker was happy. Now, if we're starting our story, we have to remember what Miss Dunlop taught you earlier in the year. You have to start with a good lead. So it wouldn't be very good if I just started the story, Tucker and Brooks played. So I might start the story, one warm, sunny spring day, Brooks and Tucker played in the backyard. They were playing fetch with Tucker's bone. Now, I'm going to keep writing. You'll see when you're writing that you might have a little squiggly line here. You might have squiggly lines. They might be blue. They might be green. They might be red, for example. If I can get, there we go. If you get some blue or red squiggly lines, don't worry about it. We will fix that in the next step. So sometimes you might get squiggly lines if there's a spelling error or if you put the wrong word, if you're not punctuating, meaning putting periods or capitals properly. But for the drafting step, we do not worry about the spelling. We really just want to make sure, and we go back to these I cans and these learning statements or learning targets. We're really just making sure that our story makes sense, has a beginning, middle, and end, and we're using that pre-writing tool that we did in step 1. We're using that to help guide our story. So stay tuned. I'm going to write up a story now. All right, ladies and gentlemen, so you could see that I sped up the writing. I just want you to look as I'm writing because I'm constantly pausing and going back and rereading it to make it make sense. Also, I know that we don't necessarily care about making sure our spelling is perfect during step 2, the drafting step. However, if we're writing and we realize that's not how we spell then obviously go back and fix it right away, because that will help us in the end. What we don't want to get stuck on is if we see a little squiggly line under a word, we don't want to stop writing and just focus on fixing that. So you can tell as I'm writing, I'm going back, I'm looking and seeing exactly what my story needs. I'm looking at my I can statements and I'm making sure it has a beginning, middle, and end. I'm remembering all those different writing tips and writing lessons that I learned this year, and I'm incorporating them and bringing them all in during this writing. I'm remembering the dialogue and really putting those quotation marks and adding meaning in my story with dialogue. I'm remembering all those fancy words and different type of words rather than boring type of words we can use, and I'm adding those into my story. This is really the time that we're bringing as much meaning and interest into our story. As I'm coming to an end on my story, I just want to touch base about the closure. So how are we going to end our story? We want to make sure, just as we started our story strong with a really interesting lead, that we're going to finish our story strong with a really good closing sentence. Don't just cut off your story and say, the end. I want you to gradually bring your story down. And if you think of your story as a hill, we don't want it to be a cliff and then a drop. We really want it to be a nice slope. Bring down your story and finish it strong. See here how there's these words that have these squiggly lines? Do not worry about that right now. Don't worry about it. And again, if you are using a piece of paper at home, save the piece of paper and put it with your planning tool, because we will get to that next time. And once we are done this, ladies and gentlemen, I want you to stop.